It's been an amazing semester and I have really enjoyed the journey through some very difficult texts with you, being challenged by ideas, hitting walls, asking why bother with these obscure, painfully crafted works of theory, and hopefully getting some experience in using them as tools to better understand things. I would like to share with you my experience of doing something similar with a cultural artifact I am fascinated by, encyclopedias. Encyclopedias are like weather gauges of a culture's ways of dealing with information, what information they find useful, and how it is organized. The ancient Roman civilization had giant encyclopedias, works of thousands of chapters written on hundreds of scrolls. When their civilization collapsed, these encyclopedias also disappeared. We only have fragments of them surviving. During the Middle Ages, when book collections were small, encyclopedias served as miniature libraries. They compacted information from hundreds of other sources. And as more and more sources were available, so encyclopedias became more involved. From a single volume, they grew to massive collections, almost as large as the great Roman texts. Wikipedia is the most recent incarnation of the encyclopedic genre, and just like the Roman and medieval encyclopedias, it tells us about how our obsession with being able to find out everything about everything plays out. Everyone uses Wikipedia, but we often don't like to admit it. That in itself is a reflection of the kind of knowledge we value and the kind we don't. Historians have studied the transformation of the encyclopedic genre as a way of mapping the progress of the rational and scientific mindset. The traditional story is that just as intellectuals and philosophers developed ever more sophisticated and rational methods for observing the world, so encyclopedic literature became more sensitive to the subtleties of logic, analysis, and scientific method. Encyclopedias not only became more extensive, they also became more sophisticated, more logical. That was the assumption with which I approached the work of Alexander Neckham, an English monk, foster brother of King Richard I. You may know him from stories about Robin Hood as Richard the Lionhearted. Alexander studied in Paris, became an abbot of a wealthy monastery, and had a network of influential friends who allowed him to access cutting-edge works of philosophy and what we would call natural science. He also wrote 2 encyclopedias, which to me was quite fascinating, especially since the first one began as a commentary on the book of Ecclesiastes, the book that says, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." His books are great compendia of knowledge about all living things, organized in sections according to the 4 elements of fire, air, water, and earth, and embellished with moralizations. Every creature is interpreted according to the virtue or vice Neckham thought resembled it. This got me really interested. Why would someone with access to new natural scientific information get so carried away by ethics and by a text that says everything is vain, be so inspired by it as to write an encyclopedia? And why, when the next generation of scholars was supposed to be more rational, did he seem to go backwards and interpret everything in the moral sense, as either virtuous or evil? The more I studied Alexander Neckham's work, the less it fitted into the traditional historical narrative of progress or reason. One of the things I noticed was that he knew much more than he gave out. There was a filtering going on. He dropped hints of newly available knowledge, but then immediately shut it down as heresy and turned on his moralistic writing hand. So what we have here is a tension. On one hand, the multiplicity of newly available material. On the other, ways of controlling it, prohibiting access, or presenting it in a way that makes one want to avoid studying it. In other words, what we have here is politics. Politics of knowledge. One way of reading this would be to fit Neckham into the traditional narrative. This guy is old-fashioned, he doesn't realize the true importance of new things. He's stuck in an older paradigm and does not want to know any better. But there was something not quite right about this. It seemed a bit too neat. And that was when I ran into the work of Pierre Bourdieu, a French scholar who builds on the ideas of Marx and Foucault, especially when it comes to politics of knowledge. Bourdieu studied how authority is created, how it is that we listen to some people as authoritative and ignore others, even if the people in position of authority are ignorant. What is it that authorizes discourse? Bourdieu observes that content is important, the technical aspect of knowledge, the what you know. But just as important is ritual, the symbolic value we attach to certain ways things need to be done. If you get drunk and break a bottle of Bundy against the hull of a ship, you're acting as a hoon. But when you're surrounded by dressed-up people and someone drops a bottle of champagne tied on a string against the hull of a ship, it means that the ship has been christened. The same act, breaking a bottle, different meaning. Similarly, if you went to private school, you may know the same information, and perhaps less even than a person from a public school, but you have something different: prestige, accent, expressions that identify you as belonging to a particular group. They define you. A person from a poor public school will sound different, and although you speak about the same thing, people around you will read you in different ways. Bourdieu builds on ideas of Foucault and Marx and his successors, and applies the idea of capital and episteme in a cultural sense. Back to Neckham. After studying Bourdieu, I realized that his focus on morals, which everyone has been reading as backward, is in fact a very important way of his expression of power. In his time, people in authority spoke in the language of moralization, and the more sophisticated one was, the more moralized he sounded, the more authority he could claim. What Neckham was doing was wrapping knowledge, much of it new knowledge, in a way that affirmed him as the carrier of power, so that he could show he was in command. But power always has a weakness. Where there is power, to paraphrase Foucault, there is resistance. Neckham was not able to see that new knowledge can exist on its own terms. In the long term, those terms did in fact win, but he was able to hold on to power for quite some time. When we look at something like Wikipedia, we seem to be in a very different situation. We have information on everything. We live in information age. On surface, of course, Wikipedia reflects our democratic world of access to everything, in which everyone can be an editor and transform, improve knowledge. But if you look closer, you will see a much more complex and interesting picture. Some articles are truly open to anyone to edit, but there are many others that are on virtual lockdown. Governments, companies, and the Kardashians employ hundreds of people who constantly watch over and edit entries to reflect the best possible public image. Competing forces try to edit, hack, or undermine these efforts just as vigorously. And the body of decision-making editors of Wikipedia has shrunk since its foundation, ostensibly to maintain the process democratic. The encyclopedia is so vast, though, that a casual reader will never see more than a seemingly endless compilation of articles on everything. Just like Neckham's encyclopedia reflects a world in which people with a cultural capital of moralization had access to authority, so Wikipedia reflects a world in which democracy, plurality of voices, and access to all information indiscriminately is the overt value. Underneath that, though, is a real struggle of power. We do not reference Wikipedia, but it is an immensely powerful tool of disseminating knowledge because so many people use it. Slight changes in how Wikipedia pages are reworded have real impact on how millions of people engage with the world, and those in power, as well as those for the time without it, know it very well. The works of theory we have been reading this semester allow you to begin to understand how power masks itself, but also how it can be unmasked and transformed. Well, that was our optimistic hope.